There I was, standing in the marble foyer of my sister's Beverly Hills mansion at 7:43 p.m. on a Saturday evening, watching my husband Marcus adjust his dress uniform for what I thought would be a simple family dinner. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just 3 hours earlier, that same sister had looked at Marcus in his civilian clothes and dismissed him as just another soldier playing dress-up for veterans discounts. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But here's what Victoria didn't know, what none of my family knew as they gathered in their designer clothes and judgmental attitudes just beyond those mahogany doors. My husband wasn't the simple enlisted man they'd spent 5 years looking down on. He was about to become the center of attention in a way that would shatter every assumption they'd made about military service, about worth, and about the man I'd chosen to marry. The doorbell was about to ring. A 4-star general was about to walk through that door, and my sister's carefully constructed world of social hierarchies and professional snobbery was about to collapse in the most spectacular way possible. My name is Sarah Elizabeth Camden-Rodriguez, and if you saw me walking through the upscale neighborhoods of Manhattan Beach, California, you'd probably see what everyone else sees. A 32-year-old marketing executive with a master's degree from USC, designer handbags, and the kind of polished appearance that comes from growing up in Beverly Hills privilege. What you wouldn't see is the woman who fell in love with a soft-spoken Army sergeant at a coffee shop in San Diego 5 years ago, whose family treated that love like a temporary lapse in judgment that needed to be corrected. You wouldn't see someone who'd spent half a decade defending her marriage to a man her family considered beneath their social status. But let me back up, because this story doesn't really begin with that doorbell about to ring. It begins with the Camden family legacy and the expectations that came with being born into Los Angeles old money. The Camden name had been synonymous with California real estate development for 3 generations. My great-grandfather, Harrison Camden, had built his fortune developing residential communities across Orange County in the 1940s. My grandfather, Harrison Camden Jr., had expanded into commercial real estate, transforming the family business into one of the most influential development companies on the West Coast. My father, Harrison Camden III, had taken the legacy to its peak, developing luxury resorts, high-end shopping centers, and exclusive residential communities that housed celebrities, tech executives, and old money families like ours. Camden Development Group wasn't just a business, it was an institution that shaped how Southern California's elite lived, worked, and socialized. Growing up as Harrison Camden III's daughter meant everything in my life was measured against the family social and professional standards. Private schools where my classmates' parents were Fortune 500 CEOs, film industry executives, and investment banking partners. Summer camps in Switzerland. College preparation that assumed I'd attend an Ivy League university and return to take a leadership role in the family business. My older sister, Victoria, had followed that path perfectly. Harvard Business School, followed by a strategic marriage to Jonathan Whitmore, whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels across California and Nevada. Victoria now served as vice president of strategic development for Camden Group while managing her social calendar of charity galas, country club events, and exclusive dinner parties. Victoria was everything our parents had hoped both their daughters would become: successful in business, married to someone who enhanced their social standing, and completely committed to maintaining the Camden reputation in Los Angeles society. I had been the disappointment. Not because I'd failed academically. I'd graduated summa cum laude from USC with degrees in marketing and communications. Not because I'd failed professionally. I'd built a successful career in digital marketing, working with clients across entertainment and technology sectors. I'd have disappointed them because I'd fallen in love with someone who didn't fit their vision of what a Camden daughter's husband should be. Marcus Antonio Rodriguez was everything my family thought they didn't want in a son-in-law. He'd grown up in East Los Angeles, the son of a mechanic and a school teacher. He'd enlisted in the Army straight out of high school because college wasn't financially viable for his family. He spoke with a slight accent that reflected his bilingual upbringing, and most problematically for my family, he worked for the government instead of building wealth in the private sector. When I'd brought Marcus home the first time 3 years ago, the reception was polite but cold. My mother, Catherine Camden, had smiled with the kind of practiced warmth she used at charity functions, while asking questions that were clearly designed to highlight his different background. My father had been more direct, discussing career prospects and financial planning in ways that made it clear he considered Marcus's military salary inadequate for supporting a Camden daughter. But it was Victoria who'd been the most cutting in her assessment of my relationship. During a private conversation in her home office that first evening, she delivered what she clearly considered necessary tough love. "Sarah, honey," she'd said, settling behind her glass desk with the kind of serious expression usually reserved for business negotiations, "I need to ask you something important. What exactly do you see in this relationship long term?" The question seemed innocent enough, but I'd recognized the tone. This was Victoria in full strategic planning mode, the same voice she used when advising clients to abandon investments that weren't yielding appropriate returns. "I see a future with someone I love," I'd replied, though I'd already sensed where the conversation was heading.
Love is wonderful, but you need to think practically. Marcus seems like a nice person, but he's a soldier. That's not a career. It's a temporary job that young men take when they don't have better options. What happens when he gets out of the military? What kind of civilian career prospects does he have? How does he plan to provide for a family at the level you're accustomed to? The assumptions embedded in her questions had been staggering. Military service wasn't a career worthy of respect. It was what people did when they lacked better opportunities. Marcus's value as a potential husband was measured entirely by his earning potential. And my happiness was less important than maintaining the family's economic and social status. "Victoria, Marcus has been promoted twice since I've known him. He's respected by his commanding officers. He's dedicated to serving his country. Those aren't temporary qualities or second-choice career moves." She'd smiled with the kind of patient condescension usually reserved for explaining complex business concepts to junior employees. "Sarah, I'm not criticizing his patriotism. Military service is admirable for people from his background, but you weren't raised to be a military wife living on government salaries and moving every few years wherever the Army sends you. You have opportunities, education, and family resources that could connect you with men who can provide the lifestyle you deserve." The men she was referring to were the sons of family friends, investment bankers, tech entrepreneurs, entertainment industry executives, and commercial real estate developers. Men whose fathers played golf with our father, whose mothers served on charity boards with our mother, whose careers were already mapped out in industries where Camden family connections could be valuable. Marcus, in their view, represented a step down from everything I'd been raised to expect from life. The pattern continued through every family gathering over the next 2 years. Holiday dinners where Marcus's military stories were received with polite disinterest, while Victoria's husband Jonathan regaled everyone with tales of luxury hotel acquisitions. Birthday celebrations where my parents asked Marcus about his retirement plans in ways that made it clear they considered his military career a temporary phase he needed to grow out of. The most painful moments came when Marcus wasn't present to defend himself. Family conversations where Victoria would express concern about my long-term financial security, where my mother would share stories about friends' daughters who'd married well, where my father would mention business opportunities that could benefit the right son-in-law. They spoke about my marriage the way you'd discuss a promising employee who'd made poor career choices, with concern for his potential but disappointment in his actual decisions. She's settling. I'd overheard Victoria telling our mother during Christmas preparations last year. Sarah could have any man she wanted. Instead, she's chosen someone whose biggest accomplishment is wearing a uniform to work. Wearing a uniform to work. As if Marcus's 8 years of military service, his deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, his leadership of 40-person logistics units, and his commendations for exceptional performance were equivalent to playing dress-up for a job that required no real skills or dedication. But perhaps the most revealing insight into my family's attitude came during Marcus's and my engagement announcement 18 months ago. We'd planned a simple dinner at my parents' house to share our news and discuss wedding plans. I'd expected some resistance, but I'd hoped that 3 years of getting to know Marcus would have softened their concerns about our relationship. Instead, the announcement had triggered what felt more like an intervention than a celebration. "Sarah, sweetheart," my mother had said, reaching across the dining room table to take my hand with the kind of gentle firmness usually reserved for delivering bad medical news. "Are you certain this is the right decision? Marriage is such a significant commitment, and there are so many factors to consider beyond how you feel right now." My father had been more direct in his approach. "Marcus, I respect your service to the country, but I need to ask some practical questions about your ability to provide for my daughter. What are your post-military career plans? How do you intend to support a family? Have you considered how different your backgrounds might create challenges in a long-term relationship?" But it was Victoria who delivered the most devastating assessments of our relationship during a private conversation that same evening. "Sarah, I need to be honest with you because no one else is willing to say what needs to be said. You're making a mistake that could affect the rest of your life. Marcus might be a perfectly nice person, but he's not right for you. He's not right for our family. And deep down, I think you know that." She'd continued with an analysis that revealed just how fundamentally she misunderstood both Marcus and our relationship. "Look, I understand the appeal. He's handsome, he's polite, and there's probably something romantic about the military hero narrative. But romance fades, Sarah. What remains is compatibility, shared values, and practical considerations about how you want to live your life. Marcus comes from a completely different world. He doesn't understand our social obligations, our business connections, or our family expectations. How is he going to fit into charity galas? How will he relate to our friends? How will he contribute to family business discussions?" The assumptions in her assessment were breathtaking in their arrogance. Military service was romantic fantasy rather than serious profession. Marcus's background made him incapable of understanding social obligations. His value as a family member was measured entirely by his ability to contribute to business discussions about real estate development. Most painfully, she'd suggested that my feelings for Marcus were based on superficial attraction rather than genuine compatibility. "I'm worried that you're confusing physical attraction and the excitement of dating someone different with actual long-term compatibility. When the novelty wears off, you're going to realize that you have nothing in common with someone whose life experiences are so completely different from yours."
That conversation had been the beginning of my understanding that this wasn't just about my family's preference for a different type of son-in-law. This was about their fundamental inability to conceive that someone from Marcus's background could possess qualities that made him worthy of their daughter's love. They decided who Marcus was based on their assumptions about military service, his ethnic background, and his family's economic status. The actual man, his intelligence, his integrity, his leadership capabilities, his dedication to excellence, was invisible to them because it didn't fit their preconceived notions about what kind of person becomes a soldier. As I stood in Victoria's foyer that Saturday evening, adjusting Marcus's dress uniform and preparing for what I thought would be another family dinner filled with subtle condescension and thinly veiled disapproval, I had no idea that everything was about to change.
I had no idea that my family's carefully constructed assumptions about military service were about to collide with a reality they couldn't dismiss or explain away. And I had no idea that Marcus Antonio Rodriguez, the man they'd spent 5 years treating as a temporary mistake in my judgment, was about to receive recognition that would force them to confront every assumption they'd made about worth, achievement, and what it really means to serve something larger than yourself. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first time I truly understood how deep the divide ran between my family's world and Marcus's reality came 6 months after our engagement, during what should have been a routine dinner at the Beverly Hills Country Club. It was supposed to be a simple celebration of my promotion to senior marketing director at Henderson & Associates, but it became the evening I realized my family had developed a systematic strategy to end my relationship. The setting itself was calculated to emphasize the differences between Marcus and the men my family considered appropriate. The Beverly Hills Country Club represented everything the Camden family valued: exclusivity, tradition, and the kind of understated luxury that required generational wealth to truly appreciate. The dining room, with its crystal chandeliers and oil paintings of California landscapes, was filled with the quiet conversations of people who measured success in country club memberships and charity board positions. Marcus had worn his best civilian suit, a navy blue ensemble we'd purchased specifically for family events, but even in perfectly tailored clothing, he stood out among the other diners in ways that had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with presence. While the country club regulars spoke in the measured tones of people accustomed to being heard without raising their voices, Marcus possessed the direct communication style of someone trained to give clear orders in high-stress situations. The contrast became most apparent when my father introduced Marcus to other club members during the cocktail hour. Each introduction followed the same pattern: polite interest in Marcus's military service, followed by questions designed to highlight his different background and uncertain civilian prospects. "Marcus serves in the Army," my father would say, his tone carrying the kind of mild enthusiasm usually reserved for discussing someone's interesting hobby. "Logistics, I believe. Very important work, keeping the supply chains running efficiently." The responses were predictably patronizing. "How admirable. Thank you for your service. What are your plans for after the military?" The assumption was always that military service was temporary, something young men did before beginning their real careers. But it was during dinner that I witnessed the most sophisticated attempt to undermine our relationship. My mother had arranged for us to be seated at a table with 2 other couples: the Richardsons, whose son David was a rising star at Goldman Sachs, and the Thompsons, whose daughter Amanda had recently married a tech entrepreneur whose startup had completed a successful IPO. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in passive-aggressive social engineering, designed to highlight everything Marcus wasn't, while showcasing the kind of men my family thought I should have chosen. "David just closed the Henderson merger," Amanda Richardson announced proudly, referring to her son's latest achievement. 18 months of negotiations, but he managed to structure a deal that saved both companies millions in tax implications. The partners are talking about making him the youngest VP in the firm's history. The pride in her voice was unmistakable, and the glances directed toward my parents made it clear this wasn't coincidental dinner conversation. This was a carefully orchestrated presentation of the kind of success my family valued and wanted me to aspire to in a partner. "That's impressive," Marcus replied politely. "Strategic planning is essential in any organization. In the military, we call it operational logistics, understanding how all the moving pieces need to coordinate for mission success. His attempt to find common ground was met with the kind of polite smile that indicated his comparison between investment banking and military logistics was charming but irrelevant. Mr. Thompson immediately followed with his own contribution to the evening's underlying agenda. Amanda's husband just moved their company to a larger facility in Palo Alto, 60 employees now, and they're projecting to double that within 18 months. The IPO made them both millionaires before they turned 30. Again, the message was clear. This was what success looked like for young people from appropriate backgrounds. Financial achievement that could be measured in concrete terms, career advancement that positioned them among California's elite, and lifestyle possibilities that matched Camden family expectations. Marcus listened to these presentations with the kind of respectful attention he might give to briefings on topics outside his expertise, but I could see the subtle tension in his posture that suggested he understood exactly what was happening, even if he was too polite to address it directly. "Congratulations to both families," Marcus said when the presentations concluded. "Building successful businesses and contributing to economic growth is essential work."
His diplomatic response seemed to frustrate my mother, who had apparently expected more dramatic evidence of his inadequacy when confronted with such obvious examples of superior achievement. "Marcus, tell us about your work," she said, her tone carrying the kind of false interest that indicated she was setting up a comparison she expected him to lose. "What exactly does a logistics specialist do in the Army?" It was a trap disguised as polite conversation. Military work, in my family's understanding, was necessarily less complex, less important, and less impressive than civilian business achievements. They expected Marcus to describe routine supply management duties that would pale in comparison to merger negotiations and tech startups. Marcus's response surprised everyone at the table, including me. "Currently, I oversee supply chain operations for forward operating bases across 3 countries," he said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone discussing expertise others couldn't fully comprehend. "That involves coordinating transportation, communication, and resource allocation for approximately 2,000 personnel in environments where failures can result in casualties rather than lost profits." The precision of his answer and the casual mention of life and death consequences shifted the atmosphere at the table in ways that made everyone slightly uncomfortable. "I also manage cross-cultural negotiations with local contractors and government officials who speak different languages, operate under different legal systems, and have different priorities than American business interests. Success requires understanding regional politics, economic conditions, and security threats that change daily." For the first time that evening, the other couple seemed genuinely interested in what Marcus was saying, rather than waiting for their turn to present superior achievements. "Additionally," Marcus continued, "I oversee training programs for junior personnel who need to master complex systems under extreme pressure. The margin for error is essentially zero because mistakes affect not just mission success, but the safety of people depending on our support." The table fell silent as everyone processed the realization that Marcus's daily responsibilities might actually be more complex and consequential than the business achievements they'd been celebrating. My father, recognizing that the conversation hadn't developed as planned, attempted to redirect toward more familiar territory. "That does sound challenging," he said, his tone suggesting that while Marcus's work was admirable, it remained fundamentally different from real career success. But you must be thinking about transitioning to civilian opportunities eventually. Military service is excellent experience, but the private sector offers advancement possibilities that government work simply can't match. It was the same assumption my family always made. Military service was valuable as preparation for real career opportunities, not as a destination worthy of long-term commitment. Marcus's response revealed depths to his thinking that my family had never bothered to discover. "I appreciate the private sector opportunities that might be available," he said carefully, "but I chose military service because the work itself is meaningful to me, not just as career preparation. Some missions are more important than personal advancement." The concept that someone might choose meaningful work over maximum financial gain was so foreign to my family's worldview that they seemed genuinely puzzled by Marcus's statement. Mrs. Richardson, apparently unable to comprehend how someone could prioritize mission over money, pressed for clarification. "But surely you have personal ambitions beyond just serving? Goals for your own advancement and success?" Marcus's answer was the moment I realized how completely my family had misunderstood the man I'd chosen to marry. My personal ambitions are aligned with serving something larger than myself. His voice carried quiet conviction that made the country club dining room feel suddenly pretentious. "Success, for me, is measured by mission completion and the safety of the people depending on our work, not by personal wealth accumulation or social status." The silence that followed lasted long enough to become uncomfortable for everyone at the table. David Richardson's parents exchanged glances that suggested they'd never encountered someone who genuinely prioritized service over personal advancement. The Thompsons seemed equally bewildered by the concept that meaningful work might be more important than financial achievement. But it was my mother's response that revealed the true depth of her misunderstanding about both Marcus and our relationship. "That's very noble, Marcus," she said, her tone carrying the kind of condescending approval usually reserved for children who'd expressed admirable but impractical aspirations. "But noble ideals don't pay for houses in good school districts or provide security for future families. At some point, practical considerations have to take priority over abstract principles." The assumption that Marcus's commitment to service was abstract rather than practical, that his values were naive rather than principled, and that his priorities would inevitably change when confronted with real-world responsibilities was so fundamentally insulting that my face flushed with anger. But Marcus's response was measured and dignified in ways that made my mother's condescension look petty and small-minded. "Mrs. Camden, I understand that financial security is important for families, but I've found that work you believe in tends to provide both meaning and material success, while work you choose purely for financial reasons often provides neither." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sarah and I have discussed our future extensively. We both prioritize building a life based on shared values rather than just shared assets. That doesn't mean we're impractical about financial planning, but it does mean we measure success differently than focusing solely on wealth accumulation." The first time that evening, the other couple seemed genuinely interested in what Marcus was saying, rather than waiting for their turn to present superior achievements. But it was the remainder of the dinner preceded with conversations that felt increasingly strained
as my family struggled to maintain their narrative about Marcus's inadequacy in the face of evidence that contradicted their assumptions. But the real revelation came during the drive home, when Marcus shared insights about the evening that showed me how completely he understood what had been happening.
"Your family doesn't dislike me personally," he said as we drove through the winding streets of Beverly Hills. "They dislike what I represent to their vision of your future. They've built a world where worth is measured by wealth and status, and they can't conceive that their daughter might find fulfillment in a different kind of life." His analysis was more generous than my family deserved, but it also revealed strategic thinking abilities that none of them had bothered to recognize. "They're not trying to hurt you," Marcus continued. "They're trying to protect what they see as your best interests. The problem is that their definition of your best interests doesn't include your actual preferences or values." That night, I realized that the conflict over our relationship wasn't really about Marcus's qualifications as a husband. It was about two completely different philosophies of what constituted a successful life. My family measured success through external achievements, financial wealth, social status, professional recognition within their specific circles. Marcus measured success through internal alignment between his values and his actions, regardless of how others evaluated those choices. I was caught between those worldviews, loving a man whose principles I admired, while belonging to a family whose approval I'd always sought. But that country club dinner marked the beginning of my understanding that I couldn't have both. Either I would choose the life my family had planned for me, with a husband who met their criteria for success, or I would choose the life I wanted with Marcus, accepting that my family might never understand or approve of that choice. What I didn't know was that my family's campaign to end our relationship was about to escalate far beyond awkward dinner conversations. They were preparing strategies that would test not just our commitment to each other, but Marcus's commitment to the principles he'd articulated so eloquently that evening at the Beverly Hills Country Club. The first sign that my family had moved beyond passive disapproval to active intervention came 3 weeks after the country club dinner, in the form of an unexpected phone call that would reveal the true extent of their determination to end my marriage. I was working late at Henderson & Associates, reviewing campaign analytics for our biggest client, when my assistant knocked on my office door with an expression that immediately put me on alert. "Sarah, there's someone here to see you," she said, her voice carrying the kind of careful neutrality that suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with our visitor. "He says he's a friend of your family, but he doesn't have an appointment." The man waiting in our reception area introduced himself as Richard Blackwood, a private investigator who specialized in what he called family security consultations. He was perfectly dressed in an expensive suit, spoke with the polished confidence of someone accustomed to dealing with wealthy clients, and carried himself with the kind of professional authority that made it clear he wasn't some discount detective hired for routine surveillance work. "Mr. Camden," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk with the relaxed posture of someone who expected to be taken seriously, "I've been retained by parties concerned about your welfare to conduct some research that I believe you should be aware of." The phrase "parties concerned about your welfare" was delivered with the kind of diplomatic language that made it clear he was referring to my family without actually naming them. This was a professional consultation designed to maintain plausible deniability while delivering information intended to influence my decision-making abilities. "Mr. Blackwood, I understand your emotional attachment to Mr. Rodriguez, but these documents reveal patterns that suggest your family's concerns about his suitability as a husband may be more founded than you've been willing to acknowledge. The financial records showed Marcus's military salary, his student loan obligations from his associate degree in logistics management, and his family's economic status in East Los Angeles. Information that was accurate, but presented in ways designed to emphasize financial limitations rather than responsible money management. Marcus's earning potential, even with military advancement, will never allow him to provide the lifestyle you've been accustomed to," Blackwood continued.
pointing to salary projections that painted Marcus's career trajectory in the most limiting possible terms. Additionally, his family background includes several factors that might create long-term compatibility issues. The family background report detailed his parents' working-class occupations, his neighborhood crime statistics, and his extended family's immigration history. Again, accurate information, but presented in ways designed to highlight differences rather than acknowledge the strength and resilience required to succeed despite challenging circumstances.
But the most disturbing document was the psychological assessment, which claimed to identify personality traits that made Marcus unsuitable for marriage to someone from my background. Based on interviews with individuals familiar with Mr. Rodriguez's behavior patterns, Blackwood read from his notes, he displays characteristics consistent with what psychologists term social aspiration anxiety and compulsive need to achieve status beyond his natural social class through association with individuals from privileged backgrounds. The assessment suggested that Marcus's interest in me was primarily motivated by social climbing rather than genuine affection, that his military service was chosen specifically to create an impressive persona for attracting higher status romantic partners, and that his long-term goals included using our marriage to gain access to business opportunities and social connections he couldn't achieve independently. Mr. Blackwood, this is offensive psychological speculation based on anonymous sources and designed to support predetermined conclusions about my husband's character. I don't know who paid you to compile this material, but it's manipulative, unprofessional, and completely inaccurate. His response revealed that my family's intervention had been even more comprehensive than I'd realized. Ms. Camden, I understand your loyalty to your husband, but I have additional information that might help you understand why your family felt this investigation was necessary. He produced a second set of documents that detailed conversations between Marcus and other military personnel, financial planning discussions he'd had with Army career counselors, and what appeared to be transcripts of phone calls with his family members. Mr. Rodriguez has been researching civilian career opportunities that would specifically benefit from connections to California's real estate development industry. He's expressed interest in government contracting positions that would allow him to leverage your family's business relationships, and he's discussed with family members his plans to transition from military service into private sector work that would be significantly enhanced by Camden family connections. The implications of what Blackwood was suggesting were devastating. Marcus had planned our relationship as a strategic career move, targeting me specifically because of my family's business influence, and using his military service as credentials to make himself an attractive candidate for marriage into money and connections. These are legitimate career planning conversations that any responsible person would have with counselors and family, I said, though I could feel doubt creeping into my voice as I processed the sheer volume of detailed information Blackwood had somehow obtained. Ms. Camden, I investigated many similar situations where individuals from lower socioeconomic backgrounds have targeted partners from wealthy families for financial and social advancement. The patterns are remarkably consistent, and Mr. Rodriguez's behavior matches those patterns in concerning ways. He continued with examples of other cases he had handled, young men who'd used military service or other credentials to gain credibility with wealthy families before revealing their true motivations after marriage ceremonies had secured their access to family resources. The military provides excellent training in strategic thinking and long-term planning. Those same skills that make someone an effective soldier can be applied to relationship planning for individuals motivated by social and economic advancement rather than genuine emotional connection. The presentation continued for another 20 minutes, with Blackwood systematically addressing every aspect of my relationship with Marcus and providing alternative explanations for behaviors I'd interpreted as evidence of his character and integrity. His politeness, according to this analysis, was strategic charm designed to win family approval. His respect for my independence was calculated to appeal to my feminist values. His discussions about our shared future were carefully crafted to emphasize emotional connection while positioning himself for maximum financial benefit from our marriage.
By the time Blackwood concluded his presentation, he'd constructed a comprehensive narrative that portrayed Marcus as a sophisticated social manipulator who'd targeted me specifically because of my family's wealth and influence. Miss Camden, I want to emphasize that I'm not suggesting Mr. Rodriguez is a bad person or that his feelings for you aren't genuine to some degree, but the evidence strongly suggests that his primary motivation for this relationship is social and economic advancement rather than purely emotional attachment. He gathered his documents and prepared to leave, but not before delivering what was clearly the intended conclusion of his presentation. Your family loves you and wants to protect you from making a decision that could affect the rest of your life. They have asked me to provide this information so you can make fully informed choices about your future rather than decisions based solely on emotional attachment. After Blackwood left my office, I sat alone for over an hour, staring at the business card he'd left behind and trying to process the tsunami of doubt and confusion his presentation had created. Everything he'd shown me was technically factual. Marcus did earn a military salary that was significantly lower than I was accustomed to. His family was working class. He had discussed career planning that included transitioning to civilian opportunities. He had expressed interest in government contracting work. But the interpretation of those facts, the suggestion that our entire relationship was a calculated strategy for social climbing, felt fundamentally wrong in ways I couldn't immediately articulate. That evening, I found myself observing Marcus with new awareness, looking for signs of the manipulation Blackwood had described. When Marcus asked about my day, was he genuinely interested or gathering information? When he discussed his own work, was he being authentic or managing his image? When he expressed affection, was it real or strategic? The most disturbing aspect of Blackwood's presentation was how it had been designed to exploit every insecurity I had ever felt about our relationship. The class differences that had always made me slightly self-conscious were now presented as evidence of Marcus's ulterior motives. The family disapproval I attributed to snobbery was reframed as legitimate protective concern. My own judgment was portrayed as compromised by emotional attachment that prevented me from seeing obvious red flags. But it was during dinner that night that I began to understand the true sophistication of my family's intervention strategy. Marcus mentioned a conversation he'd had with his Army career counselor about post-military opportunities. Exactly the kind of discussion Blackwood had referenced in his presentation. But instead of seeming calculated or suspicious, Marcus's account revealed thoughtful planning and genuine uncertainty about how to balance his commitment to service with practical considerations about our future together. The counselor suggested that my logistics experience would translate well to civilian supply chain management, Marcus said, but I'm not sure whether I want to leave the military for private sector work. There's something to be said for mission-focused work versus profit-focused work. His ambivalence about civilian career opportunities was exactly the opposite of what Blackwood had suggested. Instead of eager social climbing, Marcus seemed genuinely conflicted about potentially leaving work he found meaningful for opportunities that might be financially superior but personally less fulfilling. When I asked directly about his interest in government contracting, his response further contradicted Blackwood's narrative. Some of the opportunities would allow me to continue supporting military operations as a civilian contractor, Marcus explained, but I'm concerned about the ethics of leaving military service only to profit from the same work I'm currently doing for service rather than personal gain. His ethical concerns about profiting from military experience were hardly consistent with someone primarily motivated by financial advancement and social climbing. That night, I made a decision that would define the next phase of our relationship with my family. Instead of confronting Marcus with Blackwood's allegations or allowing doubt to poison our relationship, I decided to investigate my investigators. If my family had hired someone to research Marcus's background, I could hire someone to research their researchers' credibility and methods. What I discovered over the next week would reveal that my family's intervention had been even more calculated and manipulative than Blackwood's presentation had suggested. They hadn't just hired someone to investigate Marcus, they'd hired someone specifically skilled at manufacturing doubt about relationships my family wanted to end. Richard Blackwood specialized in providing wealthy families with professionally packaged justifications for disapproving of their children's romantic choices. His investigations were designed not to discover truth, but to present selective facts in ways that supported predetermined conclusions about targeted individuals' unsuitability as marriage partners. The revelation that my family had essentially hired a professional relationship saboteur forced me to confront the depth of their determination to control my life choices, regardless of my own happiness or judgment. But even more importantly, it clarified something about Marcus that all of Blackwood's sophisticated manipulation had been designed to obscure. My husband was exactly the man I'd fallen in love with, and my family's inability to recognize his worth said far more about their limitations than his. The war for my marriage was escalating beyond anything I'd imagined possible, but I was finally beginning to understand that this wasn't really about Marcus at all. This was about my family's need to control my life choices and their willingness to destroy my happiness to maintain that control. What I didn't know was that their next strategy would involve attempting to sabotage not just my relationship, but Marcus's military career itself. The call that shattered any remaining illusions about my family's boundaries came at 6:42 a.m. on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after I discovered Richard Blackwood's investigation. I was in my kitchen making coffee when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end was one I'd hoped never to hear again under these circumstances. Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Manning from the 47th Logistics Command. I need to speak with you about some concerns that have been brought to our attention regarding your husband's conduct and fitness for duty. The words hit me like a physical blow. My husband hadn't just hired investigators to sabotage our relationship, they'd escalated to contacting Marcus's military command with allegations that could destroy his career. "Ma'am, I think there's been some kind of mistake," I managed, though my voice was shaking with a combination of rage and terror. "My husband has served with distinction for 8 years. There are no conduct issues or fitness concerns." Lieutenant Colonel Manning's response revealed the sophisticated nature of whatever allegations had been made. "Mrs. Rodriguez, we've received formal complaints from what appear to be credible sources suggesting that Sergeant Rodriguez may be experiencing personal stresses that are affecting his judgment and reliability. These complaints include concerns about financial pressures, family conflicts, and potential security risks related to his personal relationships." Each phrase was carefully chosen to sound official and concerning, while remaining vague enough to be difficult to refute directly. Financial pressures could refer to normal military family budgeting. Family conflicts could describe any disagreement with in-laws. Security risks related to personal relationships was so broad that it could mean almost anything. "Ma'am, what specific allegations have been made and who made them?" "I can't discuss the details of ongoing personnel investigations, but I can tell you that we take any concerns about service members' fitness for duty very seriously, especially when those concerns come from individuals with no apparent motive other than genuine worry about a soldier's well-being." Individuals with no apparent motive. My family had positioned themselves as concerned citizens reporting potential problems with a service member, rather than relatives trying to destroy an unwanted son-in-law's career. The investigation that followed was the most professionally humiliating experience of our marriage. Marcus was required to undergo psychological evaluation, financial disclosure review, and comprehensive interviews about his personal relationships and family dynamics. Every aspect of our marriage was scrutinized by military personnel trying to determine whether his civilian life posed risks to his military effectiveness. The psychological evaluation was particularly devastating because it was designed to identify exactly the kind of stress and instability my family's interventions had been calculated to create. Questions about family acceptance, financial security, and relationship stability that would reveal the impact of months of systematic pressure and manipulation.
Sergeant Rodriguez, the military psychologist, had asked during one session, "How would you describe your relationship with your wife's family?" Marcus's honest answer that there were ongoing tensions and disagreements about our relationship was noted as evidence of family conflict that might affect his emotional stability. Have you experienced any financial pressures related to maintaining relationships or lifestyle expectations beyond your military salary? Again, Marcus's truthful acknowledgement that we'd sometimes struggled with the economic differences between our backgrounds was recorded as potential financial stress that could create security vulnerabilities. Every honest response Marcus gave provided documentation for concerns my family had alleged, even though those concerns existed only because of their deliberate campaign to create the very problems they were reporting. But it was during my own interview with military investigators that I fully understood the breadth of my family's betrayal. The allegations weren't just about Marcus's fitness for duty. They included suggestions that I might be providing him with access to sensitive business information that could create conflicts of interest or security risks. Mrs. Rodriguez, we need to ask about your family's business connections and whether any information about government contracts, development projects, or political relationships has been shared with your husband. The implication was that Marcus might be using our marriage to gather intelligence about Camden Development Group's government contracts for purposes that could compromise security or create conflicts with his military duties. My husband has never asked for information about my family's business, and I've never shared anything that could create conflicts with his military service, I replied, but I could see the investigators making notes that suggested my denials were being evaluated for credibility rather than simply accepted. The investigation expanded to include interviews with Marcus's military colleagues, reviews of his service record for any signs of declining performance, and background checks on both of our families that went far beyond normal security clearance procedures. For 6 weeks, we lived under a cloud of suspicion that affected every aspect of our lives. Marcus's colleagues treated him with the careful politeness reserved for someone who might be facing career-ending allegations. His commanding officers watched his performance for signs of the stress and instability that had been reported. And our own relationship suffered under the pressure of knowing that every conversation, every financial decision, and every interaction with my family was potentially being evaluated as evidence for or against the allegations. The breakthrough came not through military channels, but through my own investigation into how my family had orchestrated this campaign. Using contacts from my marketing career who specialized in corporate security, I hired investigators to research the sources of the allegations against Marcus. What they discovered was a systematic campaign that went far beyond hiring Richard Blackwood to research Marcus's background. My family had consulted with specialists in what could only be described as reputation warfare, professionals who knew exactly how to create official problems for targeted individuals while maintaining their own anonymity and plausible deniability. The allegations to Marcus's command had been submitted through a network of intermediaries designed to obscure their source, a
concerned citizen who claimed to observe financial stress indicators, a family friend who reported witnessing concerning behavior patterns, a business associate who raised questions about potential conflicts of interest or security risks. Each allegation was carefully crafted to sound credible while being difficult to prove or disprove, and together they created a pattern that suggested serious problems requiring investigation. But the most devastating discovery was that Victoria had personally coordinated this campaign, using her business connections and legal resources to identify the most effective ways to damage Marcus's military career without exposing the family to legal consequences. The evidence came in the form of email communications between Victoria and a consulting firm that specialized in reputation management for wealthy families dealing with what they termed problematic relationship situations. The emails detailed strategies for creating official scrutiny of unwanted family members while maintaining the appearance of legitimate concern rather than malicious interference. The military takes security concerns very seriously. Properly presented allegations about financial stress, family conflicts, and potential security risks will trigger comprehensive investigations regardless of their ultimate validity. The investigation process itself often achieves the desired outcome even if the allegations are eventually dismissed, one email from the consulting firm explained. Victoria's response revealed the depth of her calculation and cruelty. The goal is to make continued military service so professionally damaging that he'll have no choice but to seek civilian employment. Once he's dependent on civilian career opportunities, we can control his access to positions that would make him a suitable provider for Sarah. They weren't just trying to end Marcus's military career. They were planning to force him into economic dependence on opportunities they could control, essentially making him a puppet whose financial survival required their approval. The discovery of this correspondence provided the evidence I needed to prove that the allegations against Marcus were malicious fabrications rather than legitimate concerns. But it also forced me to confront a reality about my family that I'd been unwilling to acknowledge. They were willing to destroy an innocent person's career and reputation to maintain control over my life choices. When I presented this evidence to Lieutenant Colonel Manning, her response was swift and decisive. The investigation into Marcus was immediately terminated, and the military began its own inquiry into who had made false allegations against a service member, an offense that could result in federal charges. Mrs. Rodriguez, Lieutenant Colonel Manning said during our final meeting, "I want you to know that Sergeant Rodriguez's service record is exemplary, and there was never any legitimate basis for the concerns that were reported. This investigation should never have been necessary, and I apologize for the stress it caused your family." But the vindication came with information that changed my understanding of both the investigation and Marcus's actual military service.
Mrs. Rodriguez, I also want you to know that your husband has been recommended for advanced training opportunities that will likely lead to promotion and assignment to more specialized duties. His performance throughout this investigation, maintaining professionalism and integrity despite obvious personal stress, has actually strengthened his standing with command leadership. Advanced training opportunities? Promotion recommendations? Specialized duties? Marcus's military career wasn't just surviving my family's attack. It was advancing in ways that revealed capabilities and potential I'd never fully understood. What kind of specialized duties? I asked, curious about aspects of Marcus's service that apparently extended beyond the logistics work I thought defined his career. Lieutenant Colonel Manning's response was carefully worded but illuminating. Sergeant Rodriguez has qualifications and clearances that make him eligible for assignments requiring high levels of security, discretion, and operational capability. The advanced training would prepare him for responsibilities that utilize his full potential rather than just his current specialization. High levels of security, operational capability.
Full potential? My family had been trying to destroy the career of someone whose actual military value was far greater than any of us had realized. That evening, when I shared the investigation results with Marcus, his response revealed depths to his military service that he'd never discussed during our relationship. "Sarah, there are aspects of my work that I couldn't talk about, even with you," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd been carrying significant burdens in silence. "The logistics specialization is real, but it's not the complete picture of what I do or what I'm qualified to do." "What do you mean?" "Some of my assignments have required capabilities beyond standard supply chain management. Language skills, cultural knowledge, strategic planning abilities. The Army has been preparing me for responsibilities that go beyond what most people understand about military logistics work." Marcus continued with explanations that revealed why his commanding officers had been so supportive throughout the investigation and why the false allegations had been dismissed so quickly. "The people I work with know my capabilities and my character. When outside allegations suggested I might be unreliable or compromised, they had years of evidence proving otherwise. The investigation was required procedure, but the outcome was never really in doubt." That night, I finally understood why my family's sophisticated campaign to destroy Marcus's career had ultimately failed. They'd been trying to undermine someone whose value to the military was based on proven performance and demonstrated capabilities that existed completely independent of their opinions or allegations. But more importantly, I realized that Marcus had been protecting me from understanding the full scope of what my family's interference could have cost. His military service wasn't just a job that provided steady income and benefits. It was a career that involved responsibilities and opportunities that could have been permanently damaged by false allegations about his character and reliability. The investigation was over, but the knowledge of what my family had been willing to do to control my life had fundamentally changed our relationship in ways that couldn't be undone. I was no longer the conflicted daughter trying to balance family loyalty with personal happiness. I was a woman who'd learned that her family was willing to destroy innocent people to maintain control over her choices. The war over my marriage had escalated beyond anything I'd thought possible, and now it was time for me to make decisions about whether any relationship with my family could survive their betrayal of my husband and their violation of values I thought we shared. What I didn't know was that the universe was about to provide an opportunity for Marcus to demonstrate exactly what my family had been trying so hard to ignore: the true nature and value of the man they'd spent 2 years trying to destroy. The confrontation that would define the future of our family relationships came not through another manufactured crisis, but through a moment of genuine emergency that revealed the true character of everyone involved. It was a Saturday afternoon in late October when my father suffered a massive heart attack during a business meeting at the Camden Development Group headquarters. The call came from my mother, her voice shaking with the kind of terror that strips away all pretense and social calculation. "Sarah, your father collapsed. We're at Cedars-Sinai. They don't know if he's going to make it." Marcus and I rushed to the hospital, where we found my mother and Victoria in the cardiac intensive care waiting room, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen them. The medical crisis had temporarily swept away the careful social dynamics that usually defined our family interactions, replacing them with raw fear and desperate hope. Dr. Jennifer Chen, the cardiac surgeon overseeing my father's care, explained the situation with the kind of clinical precision that made the gravity immediately clear. Mr. Camden suffered what we call a widowmaker heart attack, a complete blockage of the left anterior descending artery. We were able to restore blood flow through emergency surgery, but he's not out of danger. The next 48 hours will be critical, and his recovery will depend on factors we can't predict right now. As we settled into what would become a 3-day vigil at the hospital, something unexpected happened. The family crisis created circumstances where Marcus's actual character and capabilities became visible to my mother and Victoria in ways they'd never experienced before. It started with small things. When my mother became overwhelmed by the medical information and forms requiring immediate decisions, Marcus quietly stepped in to help organize the paperwork, ask clarifying questions, and ensure that nothing important was overlooked. His military experience with high-stress situations and complex logistics made him naturally suited to managing crisis coordination. "Mrs. Camden," Marcus said gently, noticing my mother's confusion about insurance procedures, "would it help if I reviewed these forms with you and made sure we understand what's being asked?"
His offer was made without any reference to the years of family conflict or the recent investigation that had nearly destroyed his career. In the face of genuine emergency, Marcus responded with the kind of immediate, practical support that revealed his true character. When Victoria struggled to coordinate communication with the extended family and business associates who needed to be informed about my father's condition, Marcus offered assistance that demonstrated capabilities she'd never witnessed. "I can help manage the communication coordination if you'd like," he told Victoria during a particularly stressful moment. In the military, we call it information management during crisis situations. It involves creating systems to ensure everyone who needs updates gets accurate information without overwhelming the family with repetitive phone calls. Victoria, exhausted from hours of making the same explanations to dozens of concerned relatives and business partners, accepted his help with the kind of desperate gratitude that temporarily overrode her usual condescension. Marcus proceeded to create a communication network that streamlined updates through designated family representatives, established regular briefing schedules that prevented constant interruptions, and ensured that accurate medical information was shared without violating privacy concerns. It was organizational planning at a level that impressed even the hospital staff, who commented on how efficiently our family was managing a situation that usually created chaos and confusion. But the real revelation came during the second night, when my father's condition suddenly deteriorated and we were faced with making emergency decisions about additional procedures and potential complications. Dr. Chen explained the options with medical terminology and risk assessments that were difficult to process under emotional stress. The decision involved weighing surgical risks against the consequences of conservative treatment, understanding probability statistics about different outcomes, and considering quality of life factors that required clear thinking about complex trade-offs. My mother was too emotionally overwhelmed to absorb the technical details. Victoria, despite her business education, struggled with the medical concepts and probability assessments that required different analytical skills than she possessed. Marcus stepped into the situation with the kind of calm, methodical analysis that revealed cognitive capabilities my family had never recognized. "Dr. Chen," Marcus said, "could you help us understand this decision by breaking down the risk factors and potential outcomes in terms of specific probabilities and timelines?" His questions demonstrated understanding of statistical analysis, risk assessment, and strategic decision-making under uncertainty that went far beyond anything my family had ever seen from him. "If we choose the more aggressive surgical option, what's the probability of success? What factors affect those probabilities? And what would recovery timelines look like under different scenarios? If we choose conservative treatment, what benchmarks would we monitor to evaluate whether that approach is working, and at what point would we need to reconsider surgical intervention?" Dr. Chen responded to Marcus's questions with the kind of detailed technical explanations usually reserved for medical professionals, recognizing that she was dealing with someone capable of understanding complex analytical concepts. The surgical option carries approximately 15% risk of serious complications, but offers 85% probability of significant improvement if successful. Conservative treatment has lower immediate risk, but approximately 40% probability of requiring emergency surgery under less favorable conditions within the next 72 hours.
Marcus continued asking questions that helped Dr. Chen explain the decision in terms that allowed our family to make informed choices based on clear understanding of the medical realities rather than emotional reactions to frightening possibilities. What specific monitoring would be involved with conservative treatment, and what indicators would signal the need for immediate surgical intervention? How quickly could emergency surgery be performed if Mr. Camden's condition deteriorates further? His ability to process complex information under extreme stress and ask questions that clarified rather than confused the decision-making process was a revelation to my mother and Victoria, who had never seen Marcus function in circumstances that required high-level analytical thinking and crisis management. But perhaps more importantly, Marcus's approach to the medical crisis revealed personal qualities that contradicted every assumption my family had made about his character and motivations. Throughout the 3-day hospital vigil, Marcus never once mentioned the investigation my family had initiated against him or the professional damage their false allegations could have caused. He never leveraged the family's emotional vulnerability to extract apologies or acknowledgments of their mistreatment. He never used their dependence on his assistance during the crisis to demand recognition or respect. Instead, he simply provided whatever support was needed with the kind of selfless dedication that reflected genuine care for people who had spent 2 years trying to destroy his career and marriage. When my mother needed someone to coordinate with insurance companies about coverage for experimental treatments, Marcus spent hours on the phone navigating bureaucratic systems with patience and persistence. When Victoria needed help managing business communications to ensure Camden Development Group continued functioning during my father's hospitalization, Marcus applied his organizational skills to problems completely outside his own expertise. When the family needed someone to coordinate with extended relatives flying in from other states, Marcus created logistics plans that ensured everyone had transportation, accommodations, and updated information about visiting schedules and hospital procedures. His assistance was provided without expectation of recognition or gratitude, but it was impossible for my mother and Victoria to ignore the contrast between Marcus's actual character and the assumptions they had been using to justify their opposition to our marriage. On the 3rd day, when my father's condition finally stabilized and Dr. Chen announced that the immediate crisis had passed, my mother made a comment that indicated her perspective on Marcus was beginning to shift in fundamental ways. "I don't know how we would have managed these last few days without Marcus's help," she said quietly. "He's been like the son I never had, taking care of everything we couldn't handle ourselves." The comparison to a son rather than an inadequate son-in-law was subtle but significant. For the first time, my mother was acknowledging Marcus as someone who belonged in our family rather than someone who threatened it.
Victoria's transformation was more dramatic because it involved recognizing capabilities she'd systematically underestimated, based on her assumptions about military service and social class. "Marcus, I need to ask you something," Victoria said during a quiet moment in the hospital corridor. "The way you've been handling all these coordination and decision-making challenges, is this the kind of work you do in the military?" Marcus's response was characteristically modest but illuminating. "Some of it. Military service involves a lot of problem-solving under pressure, managing complex logistics and making decisions with incomplete information. You learn to stay calm during crises and focus on solutions rather than getting overwhelmed by problems. But the analytical thinking, the strategic planning, the way you organized communication systems and understood the medical decision-making, that's not just basic military training, is it?" Marcus hesitated, as if considering how much to reveal about aspects of his military service he'd kept private even from me. "I've had additional training beyond standard logistics work. Leadership development, strategic planning, crisis management. The military invests in developing capabilities that extend beyond specific job classifications." Victoria pressed for more details with the kind of genuine curiosity she'd never shown about Marcus's career before.
What kind of additional training? What other responsibilities do you have beyond the logistics work you've mentioned? Marcus's response revealed layers to his military service that none of us had understood. I can't discuss some aspects due to security restrictions, but I can tell you that my work involves coordinating operations that require understanding of political, economic, and cultural factors beyond just moving supplies from one place to another. Strategic planning for complex environments where multiple variables affect mission success. The conversation continued with Marcus carefully explaining aspects of his military responsibilities that demonstrated intellectual capabilities and professional achievements that completely contradicted my family's assumptions about his career value and potential. By the end of the hospital crisis, both my mother and Victoria had witnessed Marcus functioning at levels of competence and character that forced them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about him. But the real test was yet to come. My father's recovery would require ongoing support and coordination that would create opportunities for my family to either accept Marcus as a valued family member or revert to their previous patterns of dismissal and condescension. What none of us knew was that Marcus's military service was about to intersect with our family crisis in ways that would reveal the true scoop of his capabilities and force my family to confront the reality of who they'd been trying to destroy for the past 2 years. The phone call that would forever change how my family understood Marcus's military service came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after my father had been discharged from the hospital. I was in my home office reviewing campaign proposals when Marcus answered his phone with the formal tone he used for military communications. "Sergeant Rodriguez speaking?" "Yes, sir." "I understand." "When would you need confirmation?" "Yes, sir. I can be there by 1400 hours." After he hung up, Marcus sat in unusual silence for many minutes, staring at the phone with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of anticipation, concern, and something that looked almost like resignation. "Sarah, I need to tell you something about my military service that I haven't been able to discuss before," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone about to share information he'd been required to keep confidential. "That call was from my commanding officer. I'm being considered for an assignment that would require me to explain some aspects of my work that I've had to keep private, even from you." The conversation that followed revealed that my understanding of Marcus's military career had been deliberately limited by security restrictions that governed much of his actual work. "When I told your family that I work in logistics, that was true, but incomplete," Marcus explained. "My specialty is strategic logistics for special operations, coordinating support for missions that require high levels of security clearance and operational sophistication. Strategic logistics for special operations. The phrase carried implications about complexity and responsibility that went far beyond the supply chain management my family had assumed defined his career. "What does that actually mean?" I asked, realizing that I'd been as uninformed about Marcus's real work as my family had been. "It means I coordinate operations that can't fail because of supply chain problems. Missions where the wrong equipment, delayed communications, or inadequate planning could result in casualties or compromise national security objectives." Marcus continued with explanations that revealed why his commanding officers had been so supportive during the investigation my family had initiated. "The work requires understanding of political, cultural factors, language capabilities, and strategic planning that extend far beyond moving materials from one location to another. I'm essentially a strategic planner who happens to specialize in logistics support for high-stakes operations." "Why couldn't you tell me about this before?" "Security clearance restrictions. The less people know about specific operations and capabilities, the lower the risk of compromising active missions or ongoing strategic planning." But the real revelation came when Marcus explained why his commanding officer had called that morning. "There's a situation developing that requires someone with my specific qualifications and experience. It's the kind of assignment that would typically be considered a career-defining opportunity, but it would also require temporary relocation and complete operational security." Temporary relocation. operational security, career-defining opportunity. The terminology suggested responsibilities that were far more significant than anything my family had imagined when they dismissed Marcus's military service as a temporary job for people without better options. What kind of situation? Marcus hesitated, weighing security restrictions against his need to help me understand what we might be facing.
There's a multinational logistics coordination challenge that requires someone who can work with international partners, understand complex political situations, and manage resources across different countries and military systems. It's temporary, but it's also exactly the kind of work that leads to advanced leadership positions in military strategic planning. The assignment Marcus was describing sounded less like routine military service and more like diplomatic and strategic work that required exceptional qualifications and capabilities. Marcus, how long have you been doing this kind of work? The advanced assignment started about 3 years ago, around the time we got engaged. My language skills, analytical background, and performance in standard logistics work qualified me for more complex responsibilities. 3 years. My family had been trying to undermine Marcus's career at precisely the time when his military service was advancing to levels of responsibility and importance they'd never imagined possible. That evening, Marcus received permission to share additional information that helped me understand why his commanding officers considered him valuable enough to protect from false allegations and recommend for advanced assignments. Sarah, I need you to understand something about military careers that most civilians don't realize, Marcus said as we sat in our living room discussing the potential assignment. Advancement beyond certain levels isn't just about time in service or technical competence. It's about demonstrating capabilities that make you valuable for strategic responsibilities. He explained that his work over the past 3 years had involved coordinating logistics for operations across multiple time zones, languages, and political environments, responsibilities that required intellectual capabilities and cultural understanding that went beyond technical military training. The assignment they're considering me for would involve working directly with senior military leadership and international partners on coordination challenges that could affect regional stability and American strategic interests. Regional stability, American strategic interests, senior military leadership. The scope of what Marcus was describing forced me to confront how completely I'd underestimated the significance of his military career. If you accept this assignment, what would it mean for your future in the military? It would position me for advancement to leadership roles that involve strategic planning and international coordination rather than just operational logistics. Long-term, it could lead to positions that require advanced military education and responsibilities at levels most people never reach. That night, I found myself researching military career progression and strategic roles to better understand what Marcus was describing. What I discovered was that the kind of work he'd been selected for represented career tracks that led to senior leadership positions requiring exceptional qualifications and capabilities. But more importantly, I realized that while my family had been treating Marcus's military service as a temporary job he needed to grow out of, the military had been recognizing and developing capabilities that could lead to career achievements beyond anything my family understood about government service. The next morning brought a development that would force my family to confront the reality of Marcus's military value in ways they couldn't ignore or dismiss. Victoria called with news that Camden Development Group had been selected to bid on a major government facilities contract, but the project required coordination with military logistics systems and security clearances that were beyond the company's current capabilities. Sarah, we need help understanding the military requirements for this contract, Victoria said, her voice carrying the kind of professional urgency that indicated significant business opportunities were at stake. The project involves building support facilities for military operations, and we need someone who understands both military logistics and government contracting procedures. The irony was unmistakable.
Camden Development Group needed exactly the kind of expertise that Marcus possessed through his military service. But Victoria was asking for help without realizing that the solution was sitting in our living room. "What kind of military logistics knowledge do you need?" I asked, already suspecting where this conversation was heading. "We need to understand military supply chain requirements, security protocols for military facilities, and coordination procedures between military and civilian contractors. The contract specifications use terminology and reference standards that our usual consultants don't understand." Victoria continued explaining the project requirements with growing frustration about the technical complexity of military systems and procedures. "We're competing against companies that specialize in military contracting, and we need to demonstrate understanding of operational requirements that go beyond standard commercial construction. The difference between winning and losing this bid could be millions of dollars in revenue. Victoria, have you considered that Marcus might be able to help you understand these requirements?" The pause that followed my suggestion lasted long enough to become uncomfortable. "Sarah, I appreciate the thought, but this involves strategic business planning and complex government contracting. We need someone with expertise in military systems at a level that would qualify them to advise on major projects." Her response revealed that despite witnessing Marcus's capabilities during my father's medical crisis, Victoria still couldn't conceive that his military experience might include exactly the expertise Camden Development Group needed for their business expansion. "Victoria, Marcus specializes in coordinating logistics between military operations and civilian contractors. His work involves exactly the kind of cross-cultural coordination and security protocols you're describing." "Sarah, I'm sure Marcus is competent at his level, but this contract requires understanding of strategic military planning and high-level government procedures. We need someone who works with senior military leadership, not just supply chain management." I realized that this conversation presented an opportunity to educate Victoria about Marcus's actual military responsibilities, while potentially helping Camden Development Group with their business challenge. "Why don't you ask Marcus to review the contract specifications and tell you if he thinks he can help you? If his expertise isn't relevant, you haven't lost anything. If it is relevant, you might have found exactly the consultant you need." Victoria agreed to the meeting with the kind of skeptical politeness that indicated she expected to quickly discover that Marcus's military experience wasn't applicable to serious business requirements.
The meeting took place the next afternoon in Victoria's office at Camden Development Group headquarters. Victoria had prepared materials that she clearly expected would demonstrate the sophistication of the project requirements beyond Marcus's military background. "Marcus, thank you for coming," Victoria said, spreading contract documents across her conference table. "As Sarah mentioned, we're bidding on a significant government project, but the military logistics requirements are beyond our current expertise." What happened next was the first time Victoria witnessed Marcus functioning in his area of professional expertise, rather than as a family member trying to fit into social situations where his background was seen as a limitation. Marcus reviewed the contract specifications with the systematic precision of someone accustomed to analyzing complex operational requirements under time pressure. His questions revealed understanding of military systems, government procedures, and strategic planning that forced Victoria to reconceptualize her assumptions about his professional capabilities. The security clearance requirements suggest this project involves facilities that will support classified operations, Marcus observed, pointing to sections of the contract that Victoria had struggled to interpret. The logistics specifications reference coordination with JSOC, which indicates special operations support rather than standard military installations. JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command. Marcus was casually referencing organizational structures that Victoria had never heard of, but that sounded significantly more important than routine military logistics. The timeline requirements for construction completion suggest operational urgency that would require accelerated coordination between civilian contractors and military planning teams, Marcus continued. Success would depend on understanding how military operational planning affects construction scheduling and resource allocation.
Victoria's expression shifted from polite skepticism to genuine interest as Marcus demonstrated knowledge of exactly the specialized requirements that Camden Development Group needed to understand for competitive bidding. Marcus, how familiar are you with the coordination procedures between civilian contractors and military operations planning? It's a significant part of my current responsibilities. I coordinate between military operational requirements and civilian support capabilities for projects that require seamless integration between government and private sector resources. The meeting continued for 2 hours, with Marcus providing detailed explanations of military procedures, security requirements, and coordination challenges that equipped Victoria with exactly the information Camden Development Group needed to develop a competitive bid. By the end of the meeting, Victoria had filled several pages with notes about military logistics systems, government contracting procedures, and strategic planning requirements that she could never have obtained from civilian consultants. But more importantly, she had witnessed Marcus functioning as a subject matter expert whose military experience provided value that Camden Development Group couldn't access through any other source. Marcus, would you be willing to serve as a consultant on this project? Your expertise could make the difference between winning and losing this contract. The woman who had spent 2 years dismissing Marcus's military service as inadequate career preparation was now asking him to provide professional consultation that could affect millions of dollars in business revenue. Marcus's response was characteristically modest, but professionally confident. I'd be happy to help Camden Development Group understand the military requirements, but I should mention that I might be receiving a new assignment that could affect my availability for consulting work. What kind of assignment? Strategic coordination work that would involve temporary relocation for a project that required specialized logistics expertise. Victoria's follow-up questions revealed her growing realization that Marcus's military career involved responsibilities and opportunities that extended far beyond anything she'd understood about government service. How long would this assignment last, and what would it involve? Several months, possibly longer depending on project requirements. International coordination work with senior military leadership and allied partners. International coordination. Senior military leadership. Allied partners. The terminology suggested career advancement and professional recognition that forced Victoria to confront the possibility that Marcus's military service represented exactly the kind of meaningful, high-level work she'd always assumed was impossible in government employment. That evening, Victoria called me with questions that indicated her perspective on Marcus was undergoing fundamental transformation. Sarah, I need to ask you something honestly. How much did you know about Marcus's actual military responsibilities before today? Her question revealed that she was beginning to understand that our family's assumptions about Marcus's career had been based on ignorance rather than accurate assessment of his professional capabilities. The conversation that followed would be the beginning of Victoria's recognition that she had systematically underestimated someone whose expertise and career trajectory were actually more impressive than many of the civilian professionals she considered successful. But none of us knew that Marcus's military career was about to intersect with our family in ways that would force everyone to confront the true scope of his capabilities and the value the military placed on his service. The dinner invitation that would change everything arrived on a Thursday afternoon, 3 days after Marcus had accepted the strategic assignment that would temporarily relocate him to a classified facility outside Washington, D.C. Victoria had called to invite us to what she described as a family celebration dinner at her Beverly Hills mansion to honor my father's recovery and discuss exciting developments for Camden Development Group. Sarah, I think it's time for a proper family gathering, Victoria had said, her tone carrying warmth that had been absent from our conversations for years. Marcus's consulting has been invaluable for our government contracting bid, and we want to express our appreciation while we still have time before his new assignment begins. The invitation felt like a genuine peace offering after years of family conflict, but I remained cautious about Victoria's motivations. 2 weeks of witnessing Marcus's professional capabilities had clearly shifted her perspective, but I wasn't sure whether the change represented permanent acceptance or temporary expediency based on business benefits. Marcus approached the dinner with characteristic diplomatic optimism. Maybe this is finally the opportunity for your family to understand that military service and business success aren't mutually exclusive.
If they can respect my professional capabilities, maybe they can respect our life choices.
We arrived at Victoria's mansion at 7:30 p.m. to find an elegant dinner setup that suggested this was indeed intended as a significant family occasion. My parents were already there, my father looking healthier than he had since his heart attack, my mother more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. The initial conversation was surprisingly comfortable, focusing on my father's recovery progress and Victoria's excitement about the government contracting opportunities that Marcus's consultation had made possible. "Marcus, I owe you an apology," my father said during cocktails, his voice carrying the gravity of someone who'd reflected seriously on past mistakes. "I spent 2 years questioning your ability to provide for Sarah without ever bothering to understand what you actually do for work. The expertise you've shared with Victoria proves that my concerns were based on ignorance rather than legitimate assessment of your capabilities." It was the first direct acknowledgement my father had ever made that his opposition to our marriage had been unfounded. The apology felt genuine, and Marcus responded with the gracious professionalism that had characterized his interactions with my family throughout their campaign against him. "Mr. Camden, I understand that protecting your daughter's future was your primary concern. I hope my work with Victoria demonstrates that military service can provide exactly the kind of expertise and stability that makes for strong family partnerships." My mother's contribution to the evening's reconciliation was more emotional but equally significant. "Marcus, I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you did during Harrison's hospitalization," she said, tears forming in her eyes. "You took care of our family when we couldn't take care of ourselves, and you did it without any expectation of recognition or gratitude. That's not the behavior of someone who married Sarah for selfish reasons. That's the behavior of someone who genuinely loves our daughter and considers us family, despite how badly we've treated you." The acknowledgement of their mistreatment was more honest than I'd expected, and it created an atmosphere where genuine family healing seemed possible for the first time in years. Victoria's contribution to the reconciliation was characteristically practical, but equally meaningful. "Marcus, working with you on the government contracting analysis has been educational in ways I didn't expect," she said. "I've spent my entire career assuming that private sector work was more complex and valuable than government service. Learning about your military responsibilities has forced me to recognize that I was measuring success using criteria that excluded entire categories of meaningful professional achievement." She continued with reflections that revealed how completely her perspective on military service had changed. "The strategic planning, international coordination, and crisis management capabilities you've demonstrated aren't just military skills. They're exactly the kind of leadership competencies that make someone valuable in any professional context. I was wrong to assume that military service represented limited career potential rather than advanced professional development." The dinner proceeded with conversations that felt genuinely familial rather than strategically polite. Marcus shared stories about his military experiences that revealed the scope of his responsibilities and achievements, while my family asked questions that demonstrated genuine interest rather than attempts to identify problems. For the first time since we'd announced our engagement, I felt like we were functioning as a normal family where everyone's contributions were valued and respected. But the evening's most significant moment came at 8:47 p.m. when the doorbell rang with the authoritative sound that suggested an important visitor. Victoria excused herself to answer the door, and we could hear voices in the foyer, Victoria's confused questions, and a male voice responding with formal military precision. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm General Patricia Morrison, United States Army. I'm looking for Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez. I understand he's attending a family dinner this evening." General Patricia Morrison. The name carried implications that made Marcus straighten in his chair with the immediate attention military personnel reserve for senior command authority. "Marcus," I whispered, "did you know a general was coming?" "No," he replied, his voice carrying concern and confusion. "General Morrison is the commanding officer for Strategic Operations Command. She doesn't make social visits."
Victoria returned to the dining room, followed by a woman whose presence immediately commanded the attention of everyone in the room. General Morrison was in her early 50s, wearing dress blues with ribbons that indicated service in multiple combat zones and leadership positions at the highest levels of military command. But what shocked my family into stunned silence was her immediate approach to Marcus, not with the formal distance of a superior addressing a subordinate, but with the respectful recognition of someone acknowledging a valued colleague. "Sergeant Rodriguez," General Morrison said, extending her hand for what was clearly intended as a professional handshake between equals, rather than a hierarchical military greeting. "Marcus, Marcus."
Mr. Camden, Sergeant Rodriguez has been instrumental in coordinating logistics for some of the most complex international operations the Army has conducted in recent years. His language capabilities, cultural knowledge, and strategic planning abilities have made him invaluable for missions requiring coordination between American forces and allied partners. She continued with specifics that revealed why Marcus had been selected for advanced assignments and why his commanding officers had protected him from my family's false allegations. Sergeant Rodriguez's work has directly contributed to successful operations across 3 continents. His expertise in cross-cultural coordination and strategic logistics has prevented mission failures that could have resulted in casualties and compromised American strategic objectives. General Morrison paused, allowing the weight of her words to sink in, before delivering information that would forever change how my family understood Marcus's military career. Which brings me to why I'm here this evening. Sergeant Rodriguez, the President of the United States, has personally approved your selection for advancement to the Army Strategic Leadership Development Program. You're being promoted to Staff Sergeant, effective immediately, with assignment to International Strategic Coordination Command. Presidential approval, Strategic Leadership Development Program, International Strategic Coordination Command. The recognition Marcus was receiving was at levels that indicated his military service represented exactly the kind of elite career achievement my family had always assumed was impossible in government work. But General Morrison wasn't finished with revelations that would reshape everything my family thought they knew about military service and Marcus's professional capabilities. Additionally, Sergeant Rodriguez, your recent work coordinating multinational logistics for Operation Allied Strength has been recognized by NATO command leadership. You're being recommended for the Joint Service Achievement Medal and consideration for the International Military Cooperation Award. NATO command recognition, international awards, multinational coordination. Marcus wasn't just a competent military logistics specialist, he was someone whose work was being recognized by international military leadership at levels that represented the pinnacle of professional achievement. Victoria's expression during General Morrison's presentation was a study in cognitive dissonance as she processed the complete contradiction between the military service she'd dismissed and the elite career achievement being described by one of the Army's most senior commanders. General Morrison, Victoria managed, when you refer to strategic coordination and international operations, are you describing the kind of work that would qualify someone for senior leadership positions in military command? General Morrison's response provided the final piece of information that would complete my family's understanding of Marcus's military trajectory. Mrs. Whitmore, Sergeant Rodriguez is being prepared for responsibilities that could lead to command positions involving strategic planning for operations that affect American national security interests. The advanced leadership program he's entering has produced some of the Army's most successful senior officers. She turned back to Marcus with information that represented the culmination of everything he'd worked toward during his military career. Sergeant Rodriguez, your new assignment will involve coordinating strategic operations with allied forces across multiple countries. The position comes with security clearances that will qualify you for involvement in planning and execution of operations at the highest levels of military command. Highest levels of military command, multi-country coordination, strategic operations planning.
Marcus's military career was advancing to positions that represented exactly the kind of meaningful, high-impact work my family had always assumed was exclusive to private sector leadership. General Morrison concluded her presentation by addressing our family directly about Marcus's significance to American military operations. I want you to understand that the Army considers Sergeant Rodriguez one of our most valuable strategic assets. His combination of analytical capabilities, cultural expertise, and leadership potential makes him exactly the kind of officer we need for addressing complex international challenges.
Most valuable strategic assets. The phrase resonated in the silent dining room as my family processed the complete inversion of everything they'd believed about Marcus's military service and career potential. After General Morrison left, having personally delivered promotion orders and strategic assignment details that positioned Marcus among the Army's elite leadership development track, our family sat in stunned silence. The man they'd spent 2 years trying to force out of military service had just been recognized by presidential approval for advancement to positions that could lead to senior military command. The career they'd dismissed as temporary employment for people without better options was actually providing opportunities for leadership and achievement at levels that exceeded most civilian professional possibilities. "Marcus," my mother said finally, her voice carrying awe and embarrassment in equal measure. "We owe you more than an apology. We owe you recognition that we were completely wrong about everything we thought we understood about your military service and your value as Sarah's husband." My father's response was more direct and emotional. "Son," he said, using the term of family acceptance for the first time, "I spent 2 years trying to convince you to abandon military service for civilian opportunities that I thought would be more valuable. I had no idea that your military career was providing exactly the kind of meaningful, high-impact work that represents true professional success." Victoria's acknowledgement was the most significant because it represented the complete abandonment of assumptions that had driven her opposition to our marriage. "Marcus, I thought military service was what people chose when they didn't have access to better opportunities. I had no idea that the Army was providing you with leadership development and strategic responsibilities that exceed what most private sector professionals ever achieve." That evening marked the end of the conflict that had defined our family relationships for 2 years. Marcus was no longer the inadequate son-in-law who needed to be improved or eliminated. He was the accomplished military officer whose expertise, character, and career trajectory represented exactly the kind of achievement my family had always claimed to value. The woman who had called my husband just a soldier had been forced to confront the reality that she'd been trying to destroy the career of someone whose military service represented professional excellence at the highest levels of American national security leadership. And I finally understood that the conflict had never really been about Marcus's qualifications as a husband. It had been my family's inability to recognize achievement that didn't conform to their limited definitions of success. Marcus Rodriguez, the man they dismissed as just a soldier, was exactly the exceptional leader the Army needed for addressing the most complex challenges facing American national security leadership. The uniform they'd called a costume was worn by someone whose work protected their freedom to dismiss what they'd never bothered to understand. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.